Okay, so for this video, I want to go into depth with some of my extensive usage of tube and solid state amps with the Line 6 Helix. It's not that I'm sniffing corks per se, it's just what my ears and hands prefer. There are some trade-offs that I can't shake, and here's why. And more importantly, your mileage will absolutely vary depending on playstyle, genre, and needs as a musician. So what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into the pros and cons of tube and solid state. And of course, there are many more pros and cons that I could have added, but here are just a few that I found most important. So for tube amp pros, they're warmer sounding, more sensitive to picking dynamics, and the input volume of the amplifier itself. They have a more desirable bell-like tone and have unique idiosyncrasies. Harmonics sound absolutely amazing. Natural high-pass and low-pass filters that play well with all speakers currently available on the market. They sound sweet to the ears and give a natural effect of higher output. And they even have organic power stage breakup depending on what kind of tubes that you're running with your amp. And for solid-state pros, they're lightweight. They're only typically between 5 and 10 pounds. There's a large range of frequencies that they cover. Most are flat response, which is desirable for most players that like to model real tube amps. They have a lower power consumption, they're consistent in functionality, and they're flexible when using different ohm loads and cabinets. And most of them will actually automatically adjust to mismatched ohm loads. So for the tube amp cons, obviously we have maintenance. It is typical to have to service your amp every 1 to 2 years depending on the use. And depending on your amp can have a higher amount of hum due to the heater. A lot of modern amps use a DC heater, like this amp, the Blackstar and the Legacy 3, they have DC heaters, lower amount of noise and hum. Some older amps have AC heaters, which have more hum and noise. And they're fragile. You need to be particularly gentle with it during transport. That's why I have shock mount racks, because that's the only way you can safely transport one of these things. They have a higher cost and a high power consumption too. So diving into the solid state cons, I found at higher volumes, they'll typically introduce artifacts that do not represent your tone as well. Sometimes like ghost static, hum and afterbirth like effect that is undesirable to your ear. These amps tend to get very hot and have a fan that generates noise too. And if you do your research, you'll also find that solid state amps have their fair share of service requirement due to voltage fluctuations, among other things. And the biggest issue that I found with solid state amps is they lack life. I felt like my sound was missing a character. Now, there are a lot of reasons that modeling guys might refer to solid state over tubes. Myself, I'm currently in a spot where I need to cover a wealth of classic sounds from the 80s. A lot of these sounds are bare bones until you enter players like Steve Vai and Eddie Van Halen. And sure, a solid state amp will certainly get you close, and even A-Bing these style of amps could, and sometimes do, sound extremely comparable. But it all comes down to overall feel. For me, the Power Stage 700 had a specific feel to it that I could totally get along with, but it wasn't very reactive to my dynamic technique. Now, this is all relative to gain staging too, but there's a unique reactive essence that is missing with this Power Stage 700. My experience with the Power Stage 700 and series of Matrix GT amps left me wanting more warmth and breakup and natural sustain. I was able to achieve this to an extent with the Line 6 Helix, but these solid state amps are components that have limitations, and even then, I often found the tone sterile and lacking life. To add, Power Stage specifically has a weird sense of clipping at stage volume. I can't really explain it. Send me an O-scope and maybe I can. The solid state amps just had a weird distortion and afterbirth that didn't necessarily muddy my tone, but definitely had undertones that I didn't want at all. As for tube amps, they all have different sonic flavors, EL34, EL84, 6L6, KT88, etc. The list goes on for miles. They'll have different character and introduce different sounds depending on which wattage, transformer, and tube selection. And a lot of the equation has to do with your cabinet too, so don't forget about that. I ran both solid state and tube amp rigs through 4 different cabinets. The Legacy 412, the EVH 5153 412, the 5153 212, and an almighty 4x12 loaded with Celestians. And actually, all these cabinets are loaded with variations of popular Celestian speakers. Still, even then, my fingers and ears preferred the different tube amps that I used over solid state. Now, solid state technology is absolutely amazing and holds its own against its tube counterparts. I would recommend the Rocktron Velocity, the Palmer Mach, the Seymour Duncan Power Stage series, and the Matrix GT amps. If you want to go the extra mile, check out the Friedman ASC and ASM Series 112 FRFR cabs. These are the absolute best solid state options in my book, and you can eliminate a lot of setup time, EQ issues, and overall weight. These Celestian loaded cabs sound absolutely killer. For tube amps, the world is your oyster. There are so many rack mount options out there. The Marshall EL34 100, the Synergy Syn 5050, Mesa Cymol 250 and 290, the Fryet Power Station, the Fryet 252 and 292 series of amps, and then all of the full-size heads that you could possibly want. EVH 5153, the Blackstar Series 1, Mesa Dual Rack, Marshall JCM and JVM, the Friedman BE 100, endless here. You can even buy hybrid amps that incorporate solid state and tube technology, such as the Blackstar HT Stage 100, which sounds absolutely amazing. I have one right here. In the end, it's up to you as a player. Your hands and ears will decide. This is my experience, and it's absolutely okay that I prefer tube amps over solid state. Look, I didn't shut the door because I'm positive that someday I'll be able to get my hands on something that is more than convincing and will be right up my alley. And hopefully that day comes soon because I can't wait to revisit this topic. Until then, choose what you like for the reasons that you need. If there was one amp that did it all, we would all have the same exact amp. Thank you so much for watching today. Please drop a like if you liked the video, subscribe if you like my content, and until next time, cheers!